and welcome to this candidate forum for the 11th LD. I have with me our candidates for the 11th Legislative District, Representative Zach Hudgens and David Hackney. We are here and excited to ask wonderful questions, hear what our candidates have to say, understand where they come from for the community, and give you the information you need for making your choice in November. So I'd like to hand it over to Benton, who will do an introduction for the 11th LD, and then Marcy, who will introduce the Indivisible Renton, Washington.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, my name is Benton Koblentz, and I'm proud to be welcoming you on behalf of the 11th LD Dems. We are a group of active residents in the 11th LD, which is unincorporated King County, Renton, Tukwila, and South Seattle. We work together to educate ourselves, to educate the public, to register new voters, to meet and learn from elected officials, and to empower the individual to make change in our community. We meet once a month on the third Tuesday at 7 p.m., of course, always virtually. So do learn more about us at 11thlddems.org. Sign up for our newsletter, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I just want to thank Councilmember Kevin Schilling for agreeing to moderate this candidate forum. I want to thank our chair of the 11th LD Dems, Rick Polentan, our partner in this forum, Indivisible RentonWA, our fellow candidate forum organizer, Winter Cashman Crane, the members of our review committee, Jasmine Enos and Sabrina Sahayam. And of course, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight on YouTube Live. And of course, wish the best of luck to both of the candidates here tonight. Thanks a bunch, Kevin. Back to you.
I'd like to take it over to Marcy Maxwell with Indivisible Renton, Washington, to introduce her and her group for tonight's event.
Thanks so much, Kevin and Benton, and good to be with you, and good to see Zach and David here to speak to the community and voters. Indivisible RentonWA is a very active page of over 700 voters in and around the greater Renton area in South and East King County. We have a lot of discussion and learning. We take actions, and we are progressive voices in our community for local, state, federal, and all of the communities that are in and around our area. We invite you to be part of our page if you are not with us yet. It's a private page, so we want you to feel that you can have discussions here and you can bring up agendas, and we really can move progressive values and the things that we care about forward in elections and well beyond with policy making, budget making, and just, we're better off together and we get a lot of things done. So I want to thank you for allowing us to be a co-host this evening, and we're excited to hear what our candidates have to say.
Thank you, Marcy. Before we begin, I'd like to say my name. I'm Kevin Schilling, as Benton said. I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. And I'm a city council member for the city of Burien. I'm excited to be here. And before we go into opening statements and allowing the candidates to introduce themselves, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. So with that, I would like to allow the candidates to do their opening statements of 3 minutes each. And why don't we go in alphabetical order? So David, why don't you go first?
Okay. Thank you very much. So my name is David Hackney, and I'm running for state representative in the 11th district. And I'm running because representation matters. I'm running because Black lives matter. And yes, I'm running because Black legislators matter. So in South King County, where the 11th district resides, it has lower median income, average median income than the rest of the county. It has more students on free and reduced meals. It experienced 77% of all the gun violence in King County was in South King County. It's a majority minority district. It's a majority renters district. And as a Black man, I live these issues 24/7, and I'm motivated to bring change. I just don't talk about these issues during campaigns and then go to Olympia and do nothing. But I think my lived experience will tell you much more about me as a candidate than my resume will. My grandfathers survived the Great Depression and escaped the Jim Crow South because the United Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and United Auto Workers were fighting for their economic and civil rights. I'm going to fight to strengthen collective bargaining in Washington and also to address income inequality. My father was an Air Force pilot who left the service and started a Gulf gas station with my uncle, which he owned successfully for several years. I'm going to fight for small and minority business owners and entrepreneurs in Olympia. When I started high school, guidance counselors told my parents that I was not college material, but because of the love and support of my family and investments for my community, I obtained degrees from Cornell University and Harvard Law School. I'm going to fight for to meet the educational needs of every student to reach their full potential. And while in high school, tragically, my best friend was shot to death by another teenager who should have never had access to a firearm. I believe gun violence is preventable, and I'm going to fight for responsible gun laws in Olympia. And finally, my senior year in college, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer at a time when my family did not have health care. The subsequent medical bills crippled my family financially. I'm going to fight for health care for all. So I think, again, this tells you much more about what I'm going to do in Olympia, because these are my lived experiences. I tell you, in this time of crisis, we're looking for PPE, which is personal protective equipment. I think we also need PPDs, proud progressive Democrats who understand that the status quo is unacceptable and can be changed. And the 11th district is ready for change. We need new leadership to bring about the change necessary to solve these difficult problems, and I appreciate you.
And Representative Hudgens, your turn.
Thank you, Kevin, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm Zach Hudgens. I'm a state legislator in the 11th Legislative District, and I'm running for re-election. I'm running because we're seeing 4 national crises come together all at once. We've got a public health crisis around COVID, the economic crisis that is causing. We've got a racial awakening of the disparities that exist in our communities and our society that are being exacerbated by both of these things, and a climate crisis. We need proven progressive leaders to tackle these difficulties. And I think that the record matters. When it comes to fighting for unions and working people, I'm a union member. My family is all union members. My sister, my mother, my father, all dues-paying union members. It's also why the unions have supported me across the board. The Washington State Labor Council, the Teamsters, the teachers, the electricians, the machinists. I believe that the votes and the history matter in our district and about your roots in the district. It comes to effectively representing the district in Olympia. And I think that this is why I'm running for re-election again, is because we've all chosen how we apply our talents in service to the community. And people see me at Cub Scouts, they'll see me at the PTA, they'll see me helping deliver food in the community. They've seen me fight for education funding. They've seen me fight for food policy or breakfast after the bell, or changing the way our democracy works around access to democracy, fighting for opportunity around the DREAM Act, and getting things done. I think that in this time of crisis, we need people that have a proven record, that have a proven experience in the district, and that have proven accomplishments around all of these very important issues. I would very much like your support, and I look forward to all of the questions today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Benton laid out in the beginning, we will be going through a series of questions that were chosen by the 11th LD Question Review Committee. There will be a series of short answers, long answers, and yes or no questions. We are going to begin right away here. I'll let you know if it's a short answer or a long answer, so you're prepared to answer it in that manner. And we should be good to go. Are we ready for that? All right. Our first answer here is short answer. And we'll start with Mr. Hackney. What can the state legislature do to help small businesses economically, especially recovering from COVID impacts?
Well, I think we can, one, I have a safety plan, which I have on my website, which talks about how we can use the rainy day fund to invest in small businesses, particularly restaurants and childcare providers. We're going to lose 80% of all the restaurants. And when organizations die because of this crisis, they are not going to be magically resurrected at the end of it. So we're going to need to provide a stimulus to them, to assist them. And we're also going to need to do something for employees who are laid off. And if we don't invest in it, so people will say, well, how can we afford it? I say to you, how can we afford not to? We can't lose these businesses. These are the job creators in our community.
Thank you, sir. And the same question to you, Representative Hudgens.
Thank you very much, Kevin. My wife runs a small business. Her family runs a small business for many, many years, 35 years in Seattle. We've got these connections that really are about people making decisions at the kitchen table about whether they're going to be able to survive or not. The state, and I've already voted for $200 million to help prepare for the impacts of COVID. We need to actually do more than that, especially with small businesses, helping them with the costs. But it's not just about the small businesses, it's about the workers also. It's about making sure that our unemployment benefits are working, that they're getting out to people, and that the safety net is fully functioning. This is very different than a Republican model where they let people kind of fend for themselves, or where they try and nickel and dime them on the extra benefit that we're seeing out of DC. In Washington State, I fought for unemployment benefits. I fought to keep them expanded from 26 weeks to 30 weeks. I fought for paid family leave. These are all the programs that not only benefit small businesses, but individuals as well. And that's what we need to do, is make sure that individuals and our communities are whole after this entire pandemic is over and the recession is over.
Thank you, sir. On to our first long form question, or long answer question, which will be 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes to answer this question. How do we most effectively address growing income inequality, specifically for the 11th district? We can talk about the state of Washington, but I'm curious to see your answer specifically for the 11th district. What can we do at the state level for growing income inequality in the 11th district, especially that's been exacerbated from COVID? So, Mr. Hackney, you first.
Sure. I think, basically income inequality it comes from the fact that, despite rising gross national product and productivity, workers' wages have stagnated. In some cases, real wages have declined. We're going to have to do something to increase both the earning and spending power of residents of South King County, and particularly in a majority minority district. One, we can restore affirmative action so the state can be more equal in how it provides or shares benefits from both contracting, employment, and education. Second, we need to revisit what a living wage is in the state of Washington. We need to look at our regressive tax policies and that where the poorest people pay the most. We're going to need to have a progressive income tax for wealthy individuals, a progressive capital gains tax. We're going to need to continue investing in the education and training of workers so they can get good jobs, increase their earning and spending power. We're going to have to make sure that there's health care so they don't have to make the tragic choice of deciding between going to work and or not going to work and losing their resources. So we're going to have to invest in people, and that's what we can. So there's numerous things that we can do. We can expand the coverage of overtime. So as we have increased the minimum wage, employers have responded by increasing the number of hours that people have to work for so-called middle managers. We can give more of opportunity for overtime. We can lower prices. We can subsidize childcare. I believe if we had more women in the legislature, childcare would be a mandatory benefit and it would be subsidized. It's a huge hurdle for working people who want to work hard. People say, oh, is this socialism? No, we want people to work hard in the economy so they can feed their family, have stable housing, and save for the future. And these are not new issues. This has been going on for a long time and should have been addressed a long time ago. We've got majorities in the House, we've got a majority in the Senate, and we've got a Democrat in the governor's mansion. We could have done more, we should have done more, and if I'm elected, we will do more.
Thank you, sir. And to you, Representative Hudgens.
Well, I really am glad that David mentioned that these things have been going on for a long time. The Democratic platform in 1948 advocated for universal health insurance. I think we need that. I think that health care is a right. We've been fighting for that for years and years. The Clinton administration was fighting for it. The Obama administration did a great job with the Affordable Care Act. We need to not only protected at the federal level, but we've done a lot to incorporate those principles at the state level as well. It is really true that if you've got protection at the state level for healthcare, that's part of the safety net. And we've done that with the public option in Washington State. One of the first states in the country to have a public option. We've become a national model because of that access. We need to do the same thing for childcare. I've got a fourth grader, and I know that every parent out there is dealing with kids at home, trying to deal with the kids at home, the school, the work, all at the same time. It just really is showing the disparities in our communities when the pandemic hits and you see the racial disparities exacerbated, you see the income inequality exacerbated. So universal childcare is something that will not only pay dividends now, but moving forward. The same around the digital divide. We can actually invest in broadband infrastructure, and we will see that pay dividends in the future as well, not just now in education, but going forward through economic development. I've been a leader in the legislature around broadband issues for many years now, and we've organized the state in a different way. So there's a single office that deals with it at Commerce. They've been mapping where we've got broadband, where we've got disparities, where we've got unserved and underserved. So those are a few of the things we can do. The final thing is I think that we can promote homeownership. And you've seen some of my proposals around that as well, not just for first-time homeowners, but also around shared appreciation loan products so that people can refinance or stay in their homes. We've also put millions of dollars into housing resources, which is one way of really building generational wealth, especially in the 11th district. Millions of dollars into the Housing Trust Fund, millions of dollars into helping prevent homelessness, prevent foreclosures, as well as investing in actual homes all over the place. I think the Hope 6 model is a great model that we've seen here around the district as well, up on Beacon Hill, over at Greenbridge near White Center. We've seen the Renton Housing Authority has got a great model as well, where they intersperse folks into neighborhoods in order to stabilize neighborhoods and help folks really build a future in communities. So there's no easy answers. I think that anybody that says there's a bunch of easy answers, you probably should look at them a little sideways. But we've been moving forward on building a more robust safety net in Washington State, and we've got a lot more to do because all of those investments in working connections, for example, is our child care program. All of those will pay off in the future.
Thank you, Representative. And we're going to have you be the first to answer this next short answer question so that we can flip the rotation here for a couple questions. This is one that's close to my heart. It's about ways the state can support local governments as local governments are struggling to get out of impacts from COVID. So with that in mind, what types of policies or what work do you think you can do in the state legislature to ensure that cities in your district like Tukwila can recover from serious economic impacts from COVID? So no one's going to the mall. Tukwila has a budget hit. Burien's had a budget hit. What do you think you can do in the state legislature to ensure local governments have what they need to get back into shape?
Well, Kevin, you say it's a short answer, but that's kind of the $64,000 question right now for local governments. I've talked to city council members across the district in Seattle and Kent and Renton, as well as Tukwila, and their budget shortfalls are huge in relation to their budgets. And the state can do a few things. First of all, we've got a little bit more capacity than local governments. We've got a few more financing tools than local governments. And so there's some opportunities there. But the number one thing is to protect the revenue streams that go to local governments, sharing liquor and cannabis revenue with local governments, not cutting off things like the Public Works Trust Fund, for example, continuing to work with the federal government. During the last recession, the federal government helped with the American Recovery Act and pushed money down to the states, which also flowed into local governments. Some of that is happening around the CARES Act, but we need to make sure the HEROES Act gets passed and that more money flows down to the states and the local governments as well. Finally, we need to make sure that we fully fund the social safety net and that we don't look at an all cuts or an all austerity budget. We need to make sure that we're balancing that out. That we're looking at how do we make sure that we don't have an all cuts budget that impacts and hurts everybody in the long run. Thank
you, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Time hit there. No, thanks. Sorry. Your turn, Mr. Hackney.
Sure. I think the state government has to definitely provide resources to local governments, and it can do so in a number of ways. One, obviously, it can lobby the federal government for the change needed. I think over the long term, we're going to have to change our tax structure. We're going to have to change our regressive tax structure, and which will again provide more monies. We're going to have to allow local communities to be able to put in their own tax structures as well. So if you don't want to have nothing but cuts, then you're going to have to find new sources of revenue. Now, nobody likes to talk about that, but I will tell you, when Amazon is looking to go to new places, it's going to New York, which has even a higher tax burden than ours. So taxes is not the issue. It's not going to drive away business, but we're going to have to invest in communities. We're going to have to invest in the social welfare system. We're going to have to invest in small businesses. And it's not that we can't afford to, it's we can't afford not to.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney. We're going to keep it here with you for this next short answer question. This one's a little more of a personal nature. We'll ask you this question, personal nature. How long have you lived in the 11th? What's your connection to the district? What are the top issues you think you'll take with you to Olympia if you're elected?
Cool. Like many folks, I left Seattle. And I left there, and I moved here in the beginning of March of this year to have a more livable life. There are a lot of people just like me who can't afford to live in Seattle anymore, and who choose South King County. But I also saw it as an opportunity to get more involved in my community, and I recognize that this election is not going to be a contest of who lived here the longest. It's going to be the contest about who can represent the people the better. And 57% of all voting Democrats in the primary chose me because they were looking for change and for better representation on issues that are critical to this district. So again, lower median income. We're going to have to increase the median income. More students on free and reduced meals, recognizing that we need to make sure that we are meeting the educational needs of every student. Experiencing 77% of all the gun violence. We're going to have to move on responsible gun laws, and we're going to have to lead on these issues. We're going to have to sponsor those bills, not just vote, lead.
Thank you, sir. And now to you, Representative.
Thank you very much. I've been in the 11th district for 25 years. I voted for Velma and for Eileen and Margarita before I decided to run for office. And I'll tell you, my opponent has been in the district so short of a time that on his campaign flyer, he stands on a bridge that I helped get funding for. I was at the groundbreaking of that bridge. It was city, county, and state officials that helped get the $6.8 million for that bridge. It's a footbridge to help connect corridors together. I don't think I've ever seen David at a Jean Coulon Park event for clam lights or 4th of July fireworks. I haven't seen him in the Burien Parade or Arts Aglow in Burien. I haven't seen him at Cornucopia Days. It's about being out in the community, knowing what the neighborhoods think. And it's very important to take those voices and be an effective voice in Olympia. It's not just about moving into a community and saying that you know what the community means. It means being out in the community and listening to their concerns, being centered in the community and taking those voices with you to Olympia.
Thank you, sir. Back to you, Mr. Hackney. We're moving into a topic that's close to many people's hearts. We're seeing a lot of issues right now because of COVID, people struggling to pay rent, people struggling to make it, stay in their apartments, pay their mortgages, housing issues. Housing is a #1 issue for the state of Washington, but especially in the Seattle metro area and South King County. So, Mr. Hackney, we'll start with you. Do you support just cause eviction, just a just cause eviction ordinance? And what are your thoughts on addressing affordable housing in King County and for people who can't afford paying rents that are going up during COVID?
Yes, I do support just cause. I am a renter, so I support just cause evictions. I think, fairness requires that, and it's in Seattle and it should be statewide. For the housing crisis, the housing crisis is basically an issue of a lack of supply. So we're going to have to build more and incentivize building more housing. So that means we're going to have to do everything from reducing the permitting cost and time, which costs more money to build housing. We're going to have to make sure that local communities can't use zoning tricks for not in my backyard so that they don't have low income housing in their communities. We're going to have to make sure that with SEPA that we have a standard of no ecological impact as opposed to a standard of having a net gain in ecological impact. These are all tricks that communities use to block low income housing. We're going to have to mandate zoning laws that require ADUs and more multiple dwelling housing. We're going to have to incentivize with either taxes and other things, tax breaks, again, the building of low income housing. And I want to point out that my opponent is a landlord with a shady record, including of wrongful evictions, who voted against housing, protections for renters, one of only 4 Democrats to do so. So although he may have been in the community longer, he certainly seems out of touch, because in a majority renters district, not supporting renters, and when confronted on it previously, he said he didn't vote for the bill because it wasn't strong enough. But what he didn't have an answer for is, why didn't you propose an amendment? You've got an 18-year legislator who doesn't know that he can amend a bill that he doesn't think is strong enough. He voted against it because he's a landlord that didn't want to be held accountable for his improper actions toward renters. This district is ready for change. People that live in the community and understand it. So I may not have been here as long as he has, but I can tell you what, I know just in that short period of time, renters did not appreciate that vote.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney. To you, Representative Hudgens, the question about affordable housing, just cause eviction, your 3 minutes.
Thanks. Well, let's start with the just cause eviction. I support just cause eviction, especially as it's been proposed down in Olympia, and I've got a great record on housing. Mr. Hackney has taken 1 vote out of 18 years. He's taken it out of context. The bill wasn't strong enough. Folks like Eric Pettigrew and Christine Reeves voted against that bill with me. I voted for it the next year. So there's a little bit of cherry picking going on, a little bit of kind of that sort of Republican, no context kind of a thing. He references a private conflict that I had that worked out. Nobody was evicted. There's nothing shady about it. There were no fines, there were no violations, there were no citations issued. This is his effort at just throwing mud at a great record. I've supported, for example, giving folks more time to pay deposits, more time to get notice of rent increases, hundreds of millions of dollars to build more housing. The protections against renters being discriminated based on their backgrounds, which is ban the box stuff, being discriminated on where they get their income. This is all in the record. And when you're a legislator for a long time, it's in the record. You can go look it up. You can go see my great record. When you're a challenger, you just get to go throw mud all over the place. And I think that's what's going on here. I've got a great record on making sure we build housing in Sunset, which attracts private capital. That's where a lot of the housing is going in. I've supported veterans housing in Renton, supported housing at Greenbridge, supported housing here in Tukwila, through all of the housing that's being redeveloped along International Boulevard, including getting $1 million for a health clinic to go in there in Tukwila as well. So this is about bringing resources to the community that the community needs. It's about protecting renters, and it's really about using the record to stand up to his mudslinging.
So our next question is going to tie into housing, because I want you to talk about homelessness. I want you to tell us your vision for addressing homelessness, not only in the 11th LD, but when it comes down to it, it is a regional collaborative issue. We see it in Burien. It's an issue in White Center. Homelessness is central to a lot of conversations people are having at their kitchen tables, at churches, in their union halls, everywhere. If there's a community event, people are talking about homelessness because they see it and they know it as an issue we need to work on and help people who are experiencing homelessness. So I'd like a long form answer from both of you about what you're going to do going into Olympia. I know it's COVID and I know it's tough, but we have to address these issues. Can't just keep kicking the can down the road. What can we do seriously in King County and seriously in the state of Washington to address homelessness and help people who are experiencing it? So let's start with Representative Hudgens, because Mr. Hackney went first last time.
So another super big and complex problem that's going to take a lot of different approaches, a lot of different policy proposals. The easy answer is we're going to need some money. We need money to prevent homelessness. We need some protections in place to prevent homelessness. I support the eviction and the mortgage forbearance pause that we've got in place right now due to COVID. We need to make sure that we're protecting people that are being impacted by COVID from getting thrown out onto the street. We also need to have, and we need to make more robust, homelessness prevention programs and foreclosure prevention programs, including arbitration. We've done this in the past, and we need to make sure that the funding cycles for those are in place. I've supported document recording fee increases to help homelessness as well. And then, of course, we need to look at who's experiencing homelessness and what are their issues that we can help with. I love DESC's Housing First model. We've seen that at the 1811 facility. It's a great model that's worked in other cities like San Francisco and in Denver, about making sure that people have a safe place. It's about treating them with dignity, and then we're able to give them the services that they need. So it's about treating folks with mental illness different than those folks that have lost their jobs. It's about treating kids that get kicked out by their parents differently than somebody else that maybe has lost their home to foreclosure versus gotten kicked out of an apartment. Some of it is short-term fixes, rental assistance. Some of it might be longer term if it's mental health care. But we need to make sure that we've got many policy options across the board. We've put over $300 million new money into mental health services. And this is about a record. Again, I want to go to the record. We've got huge explosions of homelessness, but we've been fighting these problems for many years now. And I haven't seen my opponent anywhere around these issues. I haven't seen him talking about them. I haven't seen him in the community at all. And it should be about the record and about trying to solve these problems both locally and statewide at the same time.
Thank you very much, Representative. Mr. Hackney, your turn for 3 minutes.
Great. So, my opponent talks about, cherry picking in his record and mudslinging, but when you're an elected state representative, your votes, particularly on issues, particularly on renters' rights, is not cherry picking or mudslinging. That's just your record, and you've got to live with it. And if you're such a harsh protector of voters' rights, and then you have no justification why you voted against it, and you didn't have just one violation, you had multiple violations as reported by the stranger as a landlord. But to get more specific on the question, yes, we need to, one, understand that law enforcement and incarceration is not going to be a fix for housing. So using the police and jailing people that are homeless is a terrible idea. It only makes things worse. Again, it's the housing problem is by the most part is a lack of supply. So again, all the things I talked about increasing density, tiny houses in order to get a larger supply of housing. That's the number one issue. So the conservatives like to indicate that, it's all, people that are, mentally ill and, people that are involved in crime or other issues. That's just not the case. University of Washington studies show that it's people that are one paycheck away from being homeless because of just our fragile economy. And this pandemic has only made it worse. We need to have a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. We need to, again, provide, and also more than a moratorium, because then after the moratorium ends, you're stuck with a bill you can't pay, right? These moratorium just allow you to stack up rent and mortgage fees that you can't pay. We're going to have some way to forgive them, some way to relieve that pressure off families who are struggling to survive. And but we also then have to understand that mental illness is part of it. And again, but you don't solve mental illness with incarceration. So we're going to have to work with that community as well. We're going to have to work with teens, many of whom were thrown out of their house because of their LGBTQ status. So we're going to have foster homes and other resources for those as well. And, and I am happy not to mudsling. I see my opponent just today, released a negative statement about me, which full of lies, basically, who distorted my record, who now then comes and talks about me mudslinging. You're the only candidate in this race who has put out something that is purely negative, nothing positive about them. You've been in the office for 18 years and you don't have the person to talk about? It may be the reason why you lost the primary by 4,000 votes and 12 percentage points, and 57% of all of the voting Democrats voted for you. And almost 2/3 of everyone voted for someone other than you. So your 18-year record of being in the community hasn't done much because you haven't done much.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney. We'll start again with you for the short answer question. Flip-flop, going back and forth between the two of you starting a question. This is a short answer, but don't worry, we'll be following up with a longer form question similar to this question. So don't worry, there's plenty of time to address this issue. According to data tracked by the Washington Post, as of July 3rd, Washington has the 5th highest number of people fatally shot by police in 2019. What will you do to improve and build upon the relationship or trust between the police and the communities that are within the 11th legislative district? We'll start with you, Mr. Hackney.
Sure. I'm a former federal prosecutor, been involved in the criminal justice system. So it is a question of trust. It's a question of, having police in communities where they get to know residents. So community policing is a huge part. Secondly, is demilitarizing the police force. We don't need armored vehicles. We do not need flashbang grenades. We do not need rubber bullets. We do need social workers who can arrive with, sorry about that, my computer answered my phone, sorry. What we do need is social workers to help with mental health issues and family issues. We don't need to send an armed officer to every case. We can reallocate funding from demilitarization, from all of these weapons into community organizations, into community policing. We're building a cooperative relationship between the police and the citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney. And Representative Hudgens, your short answer for this question, and then we'll start with you for the longer question that comes after this, okay? So your short answer for this question.
Does that mean that the longer question is about the same issues?
It's similar to this, yeah, similar. It's a policing question.
Okay. Well, I agree with a lot of what Mr. Hackney said in regards to demilitarizing the police. There can be more accountability from civilians. There can be outside investigations instead of giving it to just simply another law enforcement agency. We don't need machine guns in every single police car, I don't think. We need to move towards more transparency around misconduct. We need to make sure that we are not moving bad cops from one jurisdiction to the other. I supported 940 on the floor of the House that made sure that we set a standard in state law around police accountability. It increased training requirements, increased de-escalation requirements. So there's still so much to be done, but at least we've started to take a step in that direction. I'm happy to take the longer question. But before that, I do want to say that, Mr. Hackney just taking a swing at me on talking about the voters and this and that. I think it's because people don't know what his resume is. He's a criminal prosecutor for the George Bush administration. He's a criminal prosecutor for the Department of Justice for 11 years, and he's running away from his resume. He wants to talk about his life experience. I welcome that. Let's talk about your life experience as a prosecutor. Let's talk.
Representative Hudgens, we're going to move on to this next longer form question here, where you can continue in however way you'd like. But we have 3 minutes for this long form question around policing and public safety. I'd like you to spend some time giving us your view on public safety issues in the 11th LD and wider form in King County. The previous question was specifically about police shootings in the state of Washington, but I want you to sort of offer a couple minutes on what you view as the main public safety issues in the 11th LD and what you can do in the state legislature moving forward. So beginning with you, Representative Hutchins.
Well, criminal justice, we spend about $1.2 billion on criminal justice in the Department of Corrections, up to 1.8 if you add community corrections and other support mechanisms into that. It's a lot of money. We lock up a lot of folks in Washington state, even though it's less than other states per capita. There are a lot of proposals to reform that system. So this is the contrast from us. I've been working on reducing nonviolent offenses, letting folks out of prison to get better results for our community through the Marshall Project, through justice reinvestment. I did not spend my career committed to locking folks up or chasing bad guys. I committed my career to public service in the 11th district. As we talk about what's causing these issues, it's opportunity. We need good jobs, we need stable housing, and we need to make sure that, especially during these times of the pandemic, we're seeing violence increase. We're seeing domestic violence increase. We need to make sure that we've got access to mental health. Healthcare as a human right shouldn't stop at the neck. That's a saying in Olympia, but sometimes when you talk about dental care, you talk about mental health, you talk about hearing aids, things get cut a little bit short. So we need to make sure that we are providing these services to our communities, and we'll see the benefits to that. We can make sure that we see those benefits in our schools as well. We can use our schools in some ways as a hub to distribute some of these services. We're already doing this in places where my kid goes to grade school at Tukwila Elementary, for example. They've got a clothing bank. They're tied into the food bank. They're tied into the nonprofits in the community. So it's a bigger issue than just public safety. And then each department, we've got departments across the district in Seattle, in Tukwila, Renton, Kent, and the King County Sheriff's Office that all deal with these issues very differently. And so we need to make sure that we build out a bridge and a dialogue of trust with the community. We need to make sure that our police departments are implementing cultural competency, de-escalation, and other types of training, that they are watching themselves, that they are making sure that there's outside oversight into their activities. We need to make sure that all of these things are being done, and they can be driven at the state level because the state certifies all police officers. The state runs the criminal justice training facility. And I think that it's a big difference if you look at somebody that's been committed to making the system work better for progressive causes as a good Democrat versus somebody that committed his life to locking folks up and working in the criminal justice system at the Department of Justice, especially under the Bush administration.
And 3 minutes now for you, Mr. Hackney, the same question.
Sure. We can talk about careers because I've had one, Zach. You know, you were a temporary contractor at Amazon and a temporary contractor at Microsoft, but really haven't been able to land a job in the last 10 years. But I'm very proud of my service. I was hired by Janet Reno in the Clinton Democratic Justice System, and I was there for 11 years, which moved over to 5.5 years under Janet Reno and 5.5 years under the George Bush administration. And neither of those cases did I ever prosecute or investigate the Clintons, as you mistakenly put out today. But let's talk about showing up, and let's talk about what these Black lives do matter. And you have shown up to these events. I've been there with you, but you've been there to take photo ops. And the last one, you didn't even march or listen to the speakers. You took photo ops and you went home. I wish you would have stayed so you could have really understood the issues. See, I live these issues every day. You just come up every 2 years during campaigns and make a lot of noise and then go back to Olympia and do absolutely nothing. You don't have a record on criminal justice reform. You don't have a record. Nobody talks about you as a leader for someone to stopping mass incarceration. No one has ever talked to you about a leader and demilitarizing the police force. These are not new issues. These issues have been going on. The city of Seattle has been under a consent decree because they've had use of force issues for a long, long time. You've never been a leader. You've never been outspoken. You may have voted for 940, but what you didn't do is go out and work for the initiative to get it passed. What you didn't do is show up for the implementation meetings about getting the rules for 940. And you're the elected representative. I did it as a volunteer. So yeah, my record is one I stand on. We need proud progressives as prosecutors and police. We don't want to just have one group of Republicans do it. So I'm proud of my record. I'm proud of every case I prosecuted. The cases I prosecuted with campaign finance were about foreign money into campaigns, which is now a really big issue, which has nothing to do with partisan Democrat or Republican. It's just about good government. But I'm going to show up, not just at campaign time. I'm not going to go to the Black Lives Matter and use it as a photo op. I went there to march because Black Lives Matter is about action to take down, systemic racism. You have never, ever been a spokesperson or a leader, and no one in those areas knows you. You may go to the parades and you may be in the parks, but you haven't been in the community with the people. And that's why very few people voted for you.
Mr. Hackney, we'll start with you for this next question. In regards to systemic racism and advancing racial equality in King County and in the state of Washington. First part of the question, I'd like you, this is long form, this is 3 minutes. What would you do in Olympia to address systemic racism and racial equality and racial equity issues in the state government? And also, what do you think is possible to do? So what would you want to do? And then what do you think is possible to do? And do you think there's a difference between those two things? So 3 minutes for you, Mr. Hackney.
I do not. I believe that there has been tremendous change. When my father joined the Ohio National Guard at 15, he was in an all-Black unit in the Army. And by the time I graduated from Harvard Law School in 1993, General Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So if you had asked my father when he was 15, would there ever be an African-American to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, not to mention Secretary of State, 2 under George Bush and President Obama. So we have the capacity for a lot of change. I think a lot of people who get jaded in politics from being there too long focus on what can't be done. What can we do? We can restore affirmative action to the state of Washington, both for education, for employment, and public contracting. That's going to be a huge fix right there. We can make sure that our education system, that we look at it through a racial social justice lens. One, are we making sure that students are prepared to learn? Secondly, are we making sure that the staff and faculty reflect the students that they teach? Third, are we doing something to disrupt the school to prison pipeline, where for even zero tolerance, for even minor incidents, we're pulling students out of school and putting them in juvenile detention? Third, we can, as we improve the economy, the water raises all boats, right? Rising tide raises all boats. So we are going to have to work hard to address income inequality, which disproportionately impacts African Americans. We're going to have to address mass incarceration for nonviolent crimes, for low-level drug crimes. So as a prosecutor, I have a really good idea of what needs to be done to address our criminal justice system. We need to get rid of cash bail. We have people that are in jail waiting for trial that plead guilty because they can't afford the bail, not because of the actions that they took. So our criminal justice reform, education reform, economic reform, all of those are issues. Healthcare reform. African Americans receive much worse outcomes because they don't have the same access to healthcare. And can we make changes in these things? Yes. Will they be difficult? Of course. Will they cost money? Definitely. That's why we're going to, again, have to change the way we tax people. And we have to also believe that we can achieve equality and unity. Once you give up on that, the most biggest hurdle to solving complex problems is our failure to even try. And so again, this is not something you get to talk about every 2 years during campaign. We want to see the actions that you are taking in Olympia and in the community. Were you out for I-1000 getting petitions signed? Were you out for R-88 getting that done? Were you out for I-940? Were you out there for I-1639 for responsible? You can tell me what you voted for on the floor. That's great. But your job doesn't stop there. Your job is to be a leader and a representative on these critical issues. And because you haven't, it's time for change.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney. And now to you, Representative Hudgens, same question.
Well, I think that a prosecutor would stick to the facts a little bit more. The very first award I ever got was from the A. Philip Randolph Institute, the Black Trade Unionists. It hangs on my wall in my Olympia office. And I was standing up on the floor of the House of Representatives in 940 2 years ago, before there were riots in the street in Seattle, talking about Black Lives Matter and Say Her Name. So the idea that I'm not around just simply means that David doesn't know the district well. He hasn't seen me in the district. He doesn't know my history in the district, the relationships in the district. I think it's a big deal to talk about, oh, I didn't see him here, I didn't see him. Well, I haven't seen you 5 years ago in the district either, David. And I think that it's important because it is about voting. It's about standing up on the House floor. I like to talk about the Initiative 1000 about affirmative action because I joke that I got to vote for it twice. Once to make it into law on the floor of the House and once at my kitchen table when the voters decided to challenge it. It's a big deal to stand up for these things, to lend my name to these things, to work the community in the name of these changes. And you can look at that record in Olympia as well. The Office of Equity is a big deal. Putting enforcement mechanisms behind the Office of Women and Minority-Owned Business Enterprises, for the first time reforming that office. Putting forward things like the Cesar Chavez Day, Dolores Huerta, and the DREAM Act. It took me 7 years to get the DREAM Act passed, and I got it through a Republican-controlled Senate. It's all about creating opportunity for the least among us. And I think that's what we're talking about here. You want to look at the record, you want to look at what I've done in the community, that's the important, and that's where the truth is. It isn't going to come from a prosecutor playing fast and loose with the truth that's trying to take down my service to the community, my relationships in the community, because he hasn't been around long enough to see me active in Renton, in Kent, and all over the place.
Thank you for that answer. We're going to ask a short answer question now in regards to the worst kept secret in the country, that Washington State has the most regressive tax system of any state in the union. And we have a lot of champions for progressive taxation and changing the way we tax and solve problems through our funding streams. So this is a short answer question, 1 minute. I know that's tough when it comes to such a big issue like our tax system. But 1 minute, a short answer, starting with you, Representative Hudgens. How do you view our tax system, and what do you think we can do in the legislature to create a more progressive and equitable one?
Well, our tax system has been upside down since 1935. We should have an income tax. I think people will do better under an income tax. Our 11th district has voted against taxes, yet I've raised taxes on the biggest banks when it came to it. And I've given breaks to seniors on their property taxes. We've actually lowered property taxes for folks as well, coming from the legislature. I support a capital gains tax. I support estate taxes. I think that it should be more progressive. I think more people will benefit from a progressive tax system, and ours is currently hurting the least among us and the most vulnerable among us, and we should change it. Now, when you talk about the legislature, we'll see. I'm not sure that we've got the votes now, but I'm all in favor of it. I've been working it for years, and we're getting closer. I mean, we've got the votes in the House for a capital gains tax, for example. So we're making progress, and I support it, and I'll continue to push it.
Thank you, sir. And now a short answer for you, Mr. Hackney, so a minute.
Okay, once again, my opponent is flip-flopping. So in a previous event with us, he mentioned that he didn't think it was the legislator's job to push progressive taxes, that it should go through the initiative. I think he's dead wrong. I think the legislator's job is to solve one of the biggest issues that we have, and that is the linchpin for doing so many other things. And so he mentioned a progressive income tax on wealthy people, capital gains tax, a inheritance tax, and maybe even looking for new forms of revenue. And finally, I'm going to say, when you say that you said Black Lives Matter or say their names on the floor, that's an insult. These are movements of action. We don't need you to mutter things on the floor. We need you to take action to disassemble systemic racism. And by saying, I said Black Lives Matter, you insult the people that have been out on the streets looking for action. And the reason we have them there is enchanting, is not just to hear them say it, because we want to show people like yourselves who are in power that it's time for change. But you would know that because, of course, you just show up for the photo op.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney.
And go home.
We're moving on. We're moving on to our final short answer question before we go into closing statements. So we'll start with Mr. Hackney for a minute and then Representative Hudgens for a minute about climate change. We have clearly climate issues in the state of Washington as seen by the fires that are happening right now. What can we do in the legislature to ensure that our state tackles climate change, what we can do to lead for people of Washington, but also for the country? So a minute for you first, Mr. Hackney, and then Representative Hudgens.
First, we need to recognize that cars and buses and trucks are putting a lot of carbon in the air, and it's one of the biggest sources of carbon. So we're going to have to address that. We're going to have to address mass transportation. ST3 snakes around the 11th district like it has landmines. Now, people watch the train in their backyard go right past them to other communities. So we need to have mass transportation. We need to have low-income housing near mass transportation. We need to have walkable and bikeable paths to mass transportation so people can get to work. We need to get people out of their cars. We need to invest in green energy. Those investments will more than pay for themselves. We need to transition workers from fossil fuels. I took the no fossil fuels pledge. I also took the no corporate money pledge because I'm here fighting for people in the community. And that's what I've done, and that's what I'll always do.
Thank you, Mr. Hackney. And Representative Hudgens, 1 minute for climate change.
Thank you, Kevin. I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club. I've been endorsed by the Washington Conservation Voters. Again, I was the Washington State Legislator of the Year for the Washington Conservation Voters because I've got a great record on environmental issues. Standing up and fighting for Initiative 937, both in the legislature and defending it so that we have a more diverse energy sector in Washington State is important to me. Protecting orcas, fighting for a clean fuel standard, having a carbon fuel tax, the clean fuel standards in Washington State are two policy pieces, and I support the Green New Deal. There's a lot we need to do. You're right, we're seeing this during fire season, even on this side of the mountains. There's a lot we can do. Going after the transportation sector is the biggest piece, and the clean fuel standards will be the first step that way. I voted for it. I support it. I've got a record on that.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to do 3-minute closing statements. We began with Mr. Hackney for opening statements, so we're going to begin with Representative Hudgens for closing statements. So 3 minutes to you, sir, and then 3 minutes to Mr. Hackney.
Well, I'll tell you that we all choose where we apply our talent. David chose his path to go into criminal justice and work for Republicans, and that's fine. But I don't think he should be pitching himself as a pure progressive, especially when I've got a 30-year record for working for progressives, working for Democrats, supporting universal health care, supporting environmental movements, supporting funding education, support from unions. I think we should look at the endorsements of each campaign as well. I will continue to go back to the Olympia if I'm elected, to fight for every single person in the 11th district, to fight for racial justice, to fight for a fix to climate change. I will continue to fight for working people in the 11th district as well. We need somebody that's got the experience and the skills to navigate these problems, that has the roots in the district. My kid goes to a local elementary school. You want to talk about accountability? Go pick your kid up from the school. You hear from the parents, you hear from the classified folks, you hear from the teachers, you hear from the principal about what's going on in the neighborhood and in the community. I've had that accountability my entire time in public service. It wasn't about working for George W. Bush. It wasn't about these investigations in campaign finance. It was about progressive, and it was about being here in the 11th district. I would very much appreciate your help, your support. Thank you very much for hosting this forum.
Thank you, Representative. And 3 minutes for you, Mr. Hackney.
Thank you. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my professional career. I spent 11 years as a federal prosecutor, including doing criminal justice reform in both Bosnia and Uzbekistan. I'm a former United Nations war crimes prosecutor. I have been an in-house counsel for startup for-profit and in nonprofit, both providing high-speed broadband in rural underserved areas and also in urban low-income areas. I have been a manager at Amazon conducting internal investigations, and I'm currently in-house counsel for a national organization that's going to address income inequality. And I bring all of those experiences, and I ask you to compare that resume to my opponent and his lack of employment other than the legislature really for the last 10 years. I also look at my civic engagement on the board of Tabor 100, their lead advocate for I-1000, bringing affirmative action back to the state. On the Alliance for Gun Responsibility Board, where I started as a volunteer and was, again, worked my way up to the board where I've advocated for responsible gun laws, and being appointed by the governor to the Washington State Human Rights Commission, where I hear employment and housing discrimination cases once a month. And again, I guess you can compare that civic engagement to that of my opponent. And he talks about, cherry picking his legislative record. Well, it's not cherry picking. Your legislative record in the most recent legislative session is not cherry picking. That's who you are, and that's what you voted for. And you voted against the interest of the majority of renters in your district. I want to change the way the U.S. economy works. I'm going to provide the educational needs of every student, and I am going to prevent gun violence. And I'm going to do that because I'm going to be working with my community to organize this community. So my opponent has had an 18-year audition for this role, and I don't think he's going to get the part. It's been an 18-year on-the-job interview, and despite all the things that he says he's done and all the things, he hasn't really accomplished all that much. And when he talks about his ties to the community, he only mentioned a couple, very general, of the people that know me. He didn't mention names, didn't mention organizations. Where are they? And yes, you've got most of the labor endorsements, and you got most of the labor money. And that's who you answer to. But what you didn't get was the Seattle Times. What you didn't get was the Stranger endorsement. What you didn't get was the smaller organizations. They don't have a lot of money. The Urbanists, Seattle Action 350, the Washington Housing Alliance. Those are organizations that are just focused on community needs. And so, yeah, you got all the big ones, because of your incumbency, not because of your record. And so we need to now, go head to head, compare our record, our resume, and what we've done, and let's see who the people pick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hackney. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Representative Hudgens, but thank you both for stepping up and running for office. This is a time where we need people to step up and run, and I appreciate you both doing, especially coming from someone who did it just last year. It is tough, it is rough, and thank you both for stepping up to run for office. I appreciate it. The 11th appreciates it. I want to thank you both for being here. I want to thank the 11th LD for having me as moderator. Benton, would you like to say anything as a closure for the 11th LD?
No, thank you, Kevin. Thank you to both the candidates, and thank you all for watching this candidate forum. I hope that we have many more in the future, and best of luck to both the candidates.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night, everybody.